The Association for the Study of African American Life and History, ASALH, proudly presents its 2022 virtual Black History Month Festival. Today, ASALH National President Dr. W. Marvin Delaney will host a presidential conversation, Black Health and Wellness in the Eye of the Storm. Today's conversation will feature a number of leaders within the health industry to discuss topics that directly impact the overall health and well-being of the African American community. Today's event is being brought to us by our sponsors, and we would like to acknowledge them at this time. Our legacy sponsors, our heritage sponsors, our history makers sponsors, our preservation sponsors, our hero sponsors, our champion sponsors, and our media sponsors. Before we kick off today's compelling conversation, let's first hear Lift Every Voice and Sing, brought to us by the 105 Voices, arranged by Roland M. Carter. And now, let's welcome our MC for today's historic program, Dr. Valerie Mahomes of the Asala Black History Month Festival Planning Committee.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this exciting Black History Month virtual festival event titled The Presidential Conversation, moderated by Asala President Dr. W. Marvin Delaney. I am Dr. Valerie Mahomes, your MC for this afternoon's program. Before we get started with today's program, I would like to acknowledge that this year's festival is dedicated to the memory of our friend and brother, Mr. Edgar Brookins. He was a tremendous supporter of Asala, and he is truly missed. You will hear more about Mr. Brookins later in the program. And now, please join me in applauding the 105 Voices of History for that wonderful rendition of the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. The 105 Voices is the nation's first and only national choir for historically Black colleges and universities. It was created to promote diversity in America's national venues for the arts. Thank you, choirs. At this time, we will have the annual presentation of the commemorative Black Heritage Stamp. The Black Heritage Stamp series is the longest running commemorative stamp series in United States history. The series, initiated by the United States Postal Service in 1978, recognizes the achievements of prominent African Americans and has featured outstanding individuals such as Dr. Carter G. Woodson, Dr. Percy Julian, Dr. Ernest E. Just, James Weldon Johnson, Harriet Tubman, Jackie Robinson, Sojourner Truth, and so many others who helped shape American culture through their involvement in science, technology, medicine, education, the arts, sports, government, and social activism. At this time, I invite you to turn your attention to the video on your screens to experience the revealing of the 2022 stamp in the United States Black Heritage Commemorative Series. Following the presentation of the stamp, we will have the recorded greetings from Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, representing the District of Columbia. And now the USPS stamp presentation.
I was practically driven to Rome in order to obtain the opportunities for art culture and to find social atmosphere where I was not consistently reminded of my color. Some praise me because I am a colored girl, and I don't want that kind of praise. I had rather you would point out my defects, for that will teach me something.
The 2022 Black Heritage Stamp honors the brilliant 19th century sculptor Edmonia Lewis. While some details of her early life are uncertain, we know Lewis was born in the early 1840s. Her mother belonged to a Native American tribe in upstate New York, and it's believed her father was from Haiti. Lewis overcame many difficult challenges due to widespread prejudice based on her gender, race, and class.
Edmonia Lewis is the most unusual African-American visual artist in U.S. history. Both of her parents died when she was a child, so she was raised by her mother's relatives who were Ojibwa Native American. And then her brother paid for her to go to college when she was about 16. But at college, even though Oberlin was the first co-ed and the first interracial college in the country, she was discriminated against. She was accused of attempting to poison her roommates. There was absolutely no evidence against her, so she was acquitted. During the time when they were waiting for the trial, she was abducted, kidnapped, beaten nearly to death by local citizens, and no one was ever caught. Imagine living through that and then still wanting to become a sculptor.
After she was exonerated at Oberlin, she made her way to Boston. She trained under the sculptor Edward Brackett. Finally, she made a plaster bust of Robert Gould Shaw, and she used the proceeds from the sale, along with the money that her brother Samuel sent, to make her way to Italy.
Lewis soon enjoyed success and was among the first Black sculptors to achieve widespread acclaim. She left for Europe and eventually opened her own studio in Rome in 1866. Today, several of her most noteworthy works are on display at the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. They include Old Arrow Maker, which depicts Native American characters from the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow poem, Song of Hiawatha. And her greatest neoclassical masterpiece, The Death of Cleopatra, which was created for the United States Centennial in 1876. Made of more than 3,000 pounds of Carrara marble, the depiction of the Egyptian queen at the time of her death was hailed as the most impressive American sculpture at the Centennial.
Eventually, it sold to a gambler, John Condon, who had a racehorse named Cleopatra. And he bought the sculpture for his dearly departed racehorse. And he placed the sculpture over the horse's grave. And so for a while, the sculpture occupied a saloon, and then a racetrack, and then a golf course. And then it went into storage. Eventually, it was discovered by Marilyn Richardson.
I was able to go out to Illinois and see it. It was in the storage space of a shopping mall, and it was an extraordinary moment. Some of the most vivid material we have has to do with letters that people wrote about her, because the postal service of her day, both domestic and international, plays a major part in what we know about her. So a stamp with her picture on it, her name on it, it seems like a very nice nod to the past. She was a master of publicity and of business and salesmanship. She did it all. She was a woman of color in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s, who made her living 100% as a creative artist. And that was without precedent.
The field of art, which is what makes Edmonia Lewis so important as part of this heritage series, was limited almost exclusively to men of any race. Here we have a woman who is creating figure sculptures, some of them almost life-size, in stone. And she became more famous than almost any other American artist of the time. And somehow, despite her rarity, her uniqueness, very few people know about her. So for the post office to make a decision to include someone who deservedly belongs in this group, this is really, really special.
The stamp artwork is a portrait of Lewis by Alex Bostic, based on a photograph by Augustus Marshall, taken between 1864 and 1871. Because this is a forever stamp, It will always be equal in value to the current first-class mail 1 ounce price, which means it will always be perfect for your cards and letters. The stamp is available now at USPS.com and post offices nationwide. We are proud to present the 45th Black Heritage Stamp honoring Edmonia Lewis.
This is Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. It is my honor to speak to you today as we celebrate Black History Month at the Association for the Study of African American Life and History's 2022 Virtual Festival. Black History Month is a time to remember great Black men and women and their accomplishments. As a member of Congress, I have introduced legislation recognizing many of them. In 2003, I got a bill signed into law that made the DC home of Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black History, Month, a unit of the national park system. Last August, I introduced a bill that would require the Postal Service to issue a stamp depicting civil rights leader Bayard Rustin, who helped plan the March on Washington, where I, as a student, worked with Bayard to organize that march. Historic figures like Bayard dedicated their lives to creating a more equal and just society. We must draw inspiration from their examples to ensure we are making Black history today. My bill to make DC a state would be a historic step closer to equality for the nearly 700,000 residents living in the nation's capital, a plurality of whom are African American. My thanks to the Association for the Study of African American Life and History for hosting this festival and for their work in researching, preserving, and disseminating information about Black life, history, and culture to the global community.
I hope you enjoyed these presentations. The Black Heritage Stamps are so important for preserving our history and teaching our young people about those who have come before us. We need each and every one of you to go out and purchase these commemorative stamps and share them with your colleagues, friends, and family. Thank you, Congresswoman Holmes, for all the work that you do on behalf of the District of Columbia and on behalf of ASALH. And now it is my pleasure to present to you our newly installed president, Dr. W. Marvin Delaney. Before his election as president of ASALH, Dr. Delaney served as Deputy Director and Chief Operations Officer for the Dallas African American Museum. He has also served as a consultant on African and African American history curricula with the Fort Worth and Dallas Independent School Districts, and as a guest curator for an African American history exhibition with the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission. He is a graduate of Central State University in Wilberforce, Ohio, where he earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in history, magna cum laude. He earned his Master of Arts and Doctor of Philosophy degrees in American and African American history at The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Delaney to the virtual podium, and he will introduce our panelists for this afternoon's conversations. Dr. Delaney,
Thank you, Dr. May Helms. I want to welcome everybody to this very important conversation about Black wealth and health and wellness with our distinguished panelists. Let me introduce them to you. First, we have Dr. David Carlisle, who's president of the Charles R. Drew School of Medicine. Then we have Dr. Martha Dawson, who is president of the National Black Nurses Association. We have Dr. Cheryl Lee Butler, who's president of the National Dental Association, president of the National Dental Association. And then Dr. Joseph L. Wright, who is Chief Health Equity Officer at the University of Maryland, Maryland Medical Health System. Let me start with an introduction so I can sort of lay the groundwork for our discussion today and of course, our conversation. In keeping with ASALH's Black History Month theme of Black health and wellness, we want to sort of set the stage for our conversation in terms of talking about what African Americans have contributed to medical science and health and wellness in this country. There's a long list of professionals, organizations, of healthcare professionals, of hospitals, nursing schools in which African Americans have created and of course participated. There's a long list of individuals like Dr. Charles Drew, Dr. Patricia Bath, Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, Dr. Robert Tanner Friedman, and Dr. Homer G. Phillips, and Dr. Roland B. Scott, all of whom have made contributions to health and wellness and medical science in this country. Of course, as you know, throughout our history in this country, we've faced primarily racial segregation. So as a result, as I've already noted, we've had to create our own hospitals, nursing schools, medical schools, and so on in order to take care of our own health and wellness. So with that sort of background, let me go to our panelists and have them talk about their institutions and the history of their institutions. Let me start with Dr. David Carlisle.
Well, thank you, Dr. Delaney, and greetings to all of our guests, our extensive audience. ASALH, thank you very much for inviting me to be on the panel with our other distinguished guests as well. The institution that I am honored and privileged to serve as president of, Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science, is located in South Los Angeles, more specifically and more historically, South Central Los Angeles. And we were incorporated in 1966, so we're only 55 years old. And this was in direct response to the events that occurred in 1965 in South Los Angeles, known as the Watts Uprising, the Watts Rebellion. It was because of those events that Pat Brown at that time, through the McCone Commission, identified the need for a higher education institution serving the South Los Angeles community, hence the creation of Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science. And during our 55-year history, we've remained true to our mission of identifying young people from under-resourced, underrepresented, underserved communities and populations to go into the health professions that need them so drastically. I just want to say that one of my proudest moments that keeps recurring is when I meet a student at CDU. I ask them where they're from, and they say, Dr. Carlisle, I grew up right around the corner. I grew up on 120th and Central. I'm from Compton. I'm from Linwood. I'm from Watts. And that tells me that our university is doing our mission successfully. This is why we're ranked as the #2 most diverse not-for-profit four-year university in the country in terms of both student diversity and faculty diversity. It's also why the Brookings Institution ranked us #3 in that same category as a value-added university, reflecting the distance traveled by our students as they go through their careers. So I'm very proud, very privileged, and very honored to be asked to serve as the president of a university named after Dr. Charles Richard Drew, who of course brought us blood banking, without which thousands and thousands of people around the world, millions potentially, would have lost their lives. So we are I'm just proud of the legacy of Dr. Charles Drew, and we're very honored to have his name.
Dr. Shirley Butler, you're next.
Good afternoon to all of the distinguished panelists, and Dr. Duhaney, thank you, and ASALH, thank you for having me. So my name is Dr. Cheryl Lee Butler. I am the 98th president for the National Dental Association. And just a little history. Imagine, if you can, there were 12 graduates from the Howard University College of Dentistry, 11 men and 1 woman. And on November 14th, 1900, they founded the Washington Society of Colored Dentists because they saw the need for an organized effort to address the needs of colored professionals. And in 1900, it would make the National Dental Association the first. And they formulated this organization because, one, we were denied membership into the American Dental Association. And so this organization was created. And then the first chapter of the national organization was the Robert T. Freeman Dental Society, of which I am a member today. And as we talk about Robert Tanner Freeman, he was the first graduate of a dental school. He actually graduated from Howard, but the sad before making his transition. So the mission of the National Dental Association is to promote oral health equity among people of color by harnessing the collective power of its members. The second part is we advocate for the needs of and mental dental students of color, and we are raising the profile of our profession in our communities. And then there was a second part to that question, and it was, do we feel like our organization is still relevant, and do we still need it? And of course, we need it more now than ever. Our ancestors were the visionaries, and we as dentists and the students of and dentists of tomorrow are the vision. So thank you for allowing me to briefly talk about the National Dental Association and for having me today.
Dr. Dawson.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am the president of the National Black Nursing Association, and we were established in 1971 by Dr. Laura Ann Sams, the Dean of Tuskegee University. On December the 1st, 2020, the following question after speaking to about 500 attendees, addressing COVID-19 in the nursing profession. This person stated that she was confused as to why there was a Black Nursing Association. She continued on to say, I thought we was all nurses, not just Black. She said, I really get confused when these speakers, I think, separate organization and promote separation. Well, I provided her with a twofold answer. First, I gave her my personal reply, and that is, I live in a multicolor society. Race and ethnicity apparently matters because the world is not colorblind. Then I said, I am therefore an African-American Black nurse, the same as I am considered to be an African-American Black US citizen, although we have all citizens here. Unfortunately, systemic and institutional racism will not let me forget that I am seen first as a Black person, a Black woman, and not just as a person nor a woman. After my personal testimony, then I proceeded to encourage her to listen very carefully about my professional reply to her question. 50 years ago, Black nurses were members of the American Nurses Association that still exists today as ANA. And by the way, Black nurses, including myself, we're still members. However, we did not have a voice nor a leadership role. ANA was formed in 1896. That's over 120 years ago. And we've only had 3 Black presidents in that organization. So 52 years ago, Black nurses who was attending the ANA annual meeting held a meeting with the then sitting president, who informed them that she could not change the organization to allow Negro nurses to have more of a voice, nor influence within that organization. So thankfully, we had bold nursing leaders within our own community who decided to lean in and step up, and they formed their own Black Nurses Association. Their goal at the time was to improve and support our sisters and brothers in nursing, to help to elevate them, and most importantly, to serve our community, our population living where we worked, lived, and played. So let history record that race and ethnicity plays a big part within our society yet today. However, when we established our chapter in 1971, we became inclusive. Not only did we have RNs, LPNs, and nursing students, but we also invited others. So today we do have a diverse mix of nurses. We have 111 chapters in 33 states plus DC, and we have over 4,000 members, and we're still growing. And during this pandemic, when Black nurses showed up to educate, to vaccinate, and to inform our community, no one said, "So who are you?" Because we were there before the pandemic, and we'll be there after the pandemic. Thank you.
In fact, thank all of you. But we're going to move to Dr. Wright. And Dr. Wright, I'm going to have you, of course, talk about the role of your institution. Then, of course, I want you to lead us into the discussion about the social determinants of health, and in particular, how your majority institution addresses the social determinants for African Americans.
Certainly, and thank you, Dr. Delaney. And I am pleased to be a part of this program, and want to thank ASALH for convening this program, and happy to be a part of this panel. So Joseph Wright, I am the inaugural Chief Health Equity Officer for the University of Maryland Medical System. The University of Maryland Medical System was founded in 1984 and has grown to become a 13 hospital, 28,000 member health system, which is the largest health system serving the region. And what is important about this role is that the state of Maryland is one of 8 states now where demographically the population is predominantly Black and brown. So the folks that we are serving are predominantly communities of color. And my role as the Chief Health Equity Officer is literally to ensure that the care delivered is not only of high quality, safe care, but equitable care. And to that end, my goal right now is to eliminate race-based medicine. And we are working to ensure that all of our clinical guidelines and the algorithms that we've all, frankly, grown up with in healthcare that have incorporated race and ethnicity modifiers, have incorporated decision-making pathways that are guided by race and ethnicity are eliminated. And so with that in mind, what I'd like to share and to launch into, and before I do that, Dr. Delaney, I can't not mention the fact that
Prior to joining the University of Maryland Medical System, I served as the 5th chair of pediatrics at the Howard University College of Medicine. And you mentioned Dr. Roland B. Scott, who was the inaugural chair of pediatrics at the Howard University School of Medicine, College of Medicine, who was denied membership in the American Academy of Pediatrics in 1939, denied membership 3 more times before being admitted in 1944. And as a sitting member now of the American Academy of Pediatrics Board of Directors, I am proud that although 80 years late, we were able to apologize and issue a reckoning, a public reckoning of that transgression exacted against Dr. Roland B. Scott and his mentor, Dr. Alonzo de Great Smith, to their families, and to publicly acknowledge that that mistake and that reconciliation. And this is the work that as organizations we all must do. So when we talk about the social determinants of health, Dr. Delaney, we're talking about those conditions that influence the health and well-being of folks in the community that may not be directly related. In fact, are less likely to be directly related to access to healthcare. As we talk about those conditions, whether they be environmental, whether they be economic, whether they be in the built environment, the delivery of healthcare, what the speakers on this panel might be responsible for, represents but a small component of those factors that influence the ultimate outcome of people's well-being. And to that end, when we talk about race-based medicine, for instance, we have to be clear that race and ethnicity are not proxies for biology. Let me say that again. Race and ethnicity are not proxies for biology. So when we see clinical pathways that attempt to incorporate race and ethnicity into clinical decision-making, we are ignoring, or we are not doing valid science to the impact of the social determinants and the ways in which social determinants of health influence outcomes. And there is a lot of unwinding, a lot of work to do around, first of all, acknowledging, because I have my members of my own board challenge me, Dr. Ray, well, where did this come from? How did we get here? And Dr. Dawson, I so appreciate your testimony, because that history is so critically important to understand how we as professionals and how we have arrived at a place where there is interwound into the work that we do, these inappropriate proxies. And so Dr. Delaney, I'd like to perhaps throw it back to you and the other panelists to really share the importance of those social determinants and acknowledging the social determinants and legitimately incorporating the social determinants into defining how we drive healthcare delivery and accounting for the social determinants, and not attempting to assimilate as false proxies race and ethnicity in those guidelines.
In fact, I'd like to pass that question on to Dr. Carlisle in terms of how Charles Drew is teaching about the social determinants of health, and indeed engaging students in social justice in the medical field.
Well, thank you very much for that. And just full disclosure, Dr. Wright and I have the same alma mater, Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. It's always great to see him, brings back great memories. You know, as we discussed about these social determinants, there's the legacy of our namesake, Dr. Charles Drew. Not only is he considered the father of modern blood banking, but he left as a leader of the American Red Cross, in part, undoubtedly, because of a controversy involving blood transfusion and blood banking at that time, which was the segregation of blood products. This remains an issue even today, where there are disparities in the distribution and collection of blood products. But this was a major issue for Dr. Charles Drew, and I think fueled a lot of his research and the remainder of his career prior to his premature death. Social determinants in health are overriding causes of disparities, certainly not the only causes. And yes, these are not proxies for biology. We see, for example, homelessness that may reduce life expectancy by as much as 15 years. That is certainly one of the major social determinants of health, but there are many, many others. And, I don't want to recite a litany, but one of the major ones is lack of health insurance, for example. Another one is education. And that's why our university, founded in response to the cries for social justice on the part of the Los Angeles African American community, is so focused on addressing social determinants of health as root causes for racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare, because these determinants are real and they're present, they're part of our everyday reality. And we are trying to tackle them head on. And this is what our university is committed to. This is why we use the phrase social justice and health equity in our mission statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Lee Butler, I want to come back to talk about oral health and how it is affected by social determinants. As you know, in the Surgeon General's report in the year of 2000, they pointed out there were profound disparities in oral health, particularly among minorities. So how does the National Dental Association address those disparities?
Yes, thank you. So you're right. The Surgeon General's report in the year 2000 was really the first where we actually addressed the oral health of Americans. And that was like the cookbook of all. And so now in 2021, the Surgeon General has now come up with the 2020 report and documenting the progress in oral health since 2020. And it provides a critical insight into issues currently affecting the nation's oral health, identifying opportunities and challenges that have emerged since then. It also articulates a vision for the future of oral health in America. But as we know, and within that report, and we're really proud about that report because there were several members of the National Dental Association, past presidents, faculty, public health administrators, who all participated in creating and implementing that report. But and what came out of that report, it talks about how the oral bacteria has been connected to over 51 diseases in the human body as it relates to oral health. And so many of our patients and many of our practitioners work in areas treating the underserved who have either poor insurance or no insurance. And so it affects our population even more. So this is an important and a topic that we're discussing today. And so with these what has happened in the past, which I wanted to mention, is that for so long, the oral cavity has been separated from the human body and we haven't made the connection. But in this new report, it's becoming more apparent that the oral cavity has to be addressed. You can't just pass by the oral cavity and go to the throat and then address the rest of the body. So we're very excited about this report. And I know it's a very lengthy report, but we're very excited about it, about what has come out in that document.
Thank you so much. Let me go back to Dr. Dawson and talk about COVID-19. As you know, African Americans and other minorities have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And of course, it has in particular instances affected the nursing profession. So how has the Black Nurses Association addressed and responded to the impact of COVID-19?
Well, we were fortunate, as I stated earlier, we was already out in the community working. So immediately as when COVID-19 hit, the first thing we started doing was the education aspect, informing not only our nurses so they can go out and inform our communities, but working with our partners that we already had in the community, such as the faith-based organization, working with the health departments, networking again with the schools as well. So we started off with the education aspect first, and then as they started developing the vaccine, we started addressing and informing the public about the vaccinations. And my nurses have been out vaccinated. We have had some of my chapters that have vaccinated maybe as many as 7,000 individuals just by one chapter. But one of the things that we also tried to address early on, because the virus was being so politicized and there was so much misinformation and disinformation out there, and we felt that we really needed to pivot and make sure that our population was receiving sound information from nurses that they knew and could trust. But then in addition to that, we also had to focus on the social determinants of health. But what we did was we moved back upstream and started looking at those things that they needed, focusing on food insecurity, making sure that we was working with, food banks to get food into the homes and things, checking in on our elderly population again, making sure that they were well and that they knew about the virus, how to take care of themselves. We did a lot in terms of pushing out some of the mask, hand sanitizer, and those type of things. For example, when the schools opened back up this past fall in September, I had at least 17 in my chapter to work with 115 schools. And we literally gave out over 180,000 pieces of supplies, whether they was mask, hand sanitizer. We provided schools with thermometer to check, for kids' temperature, wipes for the surfaces. Because what we found out is that the supplies that they had received prior to opening the school was gone in about 2 weeks, and no one was addressing that need. So we really tried to focus on that aspect. But the other thing we really wanted to focus on was the wellness of our nurses. So again, we was able to collaborate with one of our corporate partners, and we started in that mental health space a whole year before the news even picked up on it. Checking in on our nurses to make sure they felt safe, making sure they was taking care of themselves, providing them with opportunity to talk to mental health providers if they needed that service. And they could do it anonymously. The other thing that we really had to focus on as well with our nursing population was, again, history will tell us that, quote unquote, the practice within a lot of hospitals is that African American nurses are not smart enough to be in the ICUs. But as soon as the pandemic hit, we was in the ICUs and everywhere else. So again, we had to make sure nurses were not being able to or being asked to step into spaces where they had not received education, training, and those type of things. But I'm very proud of my nurses because they are working hard. They are on the radio, television, whatever you need, we have been there to support our community and to support each other. So when I look back on this, hopefully when we're out of this pandemic, that people will say that the Black nurses were there to provide information, to provide intervention, to support, and that we didn't just focus on and I like to refer to the social determinants of health of our failures, because if we took care and made sure we had safe housing, clean water, our air wasn't polluted, we wouldn't have a lot of the health issues that we have. If we had good food, and fresh vegetables. So those are the things we've been promoting, is that we have to get back to focusing on health care and not so much on illness care.
Thank you so much. Dr. Wright, concurrent with the deaths from COVID-19, the Pew Charitable Trust found that in 2020, 92,000 Americans died of a drug overdose, representing a 30% increase over 2019. What do you view as the causes of this, these deaths from opioids? And of course, the largest group of this increase were African American men.
Well, let me backtrack just a little bit, Dr. Delaney. It's interesting that the focus and attention on the quote unquote opioid crisis has come into focus when it has begun to affect other people. We have long struggled in communities of color with opiates in many forms, and the last the report that you referenced has spoken much more about the impact on communities more broadly than communities of color, and largely for the abuse of prescription opiates. And I find that when we talk about disparities in care also stretch out in disparities to resource allotment, disparities to even attention to what is a public health issue. Now, that does not in any way minimize, and I am not trying to avoid your question, but it always strikes me that when we talk about the opioid crisis, it is as if this thing popped up within the last 2 or 3 years. And very interesting also in terms of public health response. I have a background in public safety and EMS, and it was not until the last couple or 3 years that we began to provide a reversal drug for an overdose to our EMS providers, despite the fact that folks have been overdosing for decades. And why is that? Again, I just want to point out the challenge that we have in leveling the playing field when it comes to shining a light on issues that affect communities of color, issues that affect communities of color driven by the social determinants of health. And there are many examples across the history of medicine where that attention only comes about once the issue is more broadly experienced across the society. And certainly that has been the case with the opioids. In my own state, there is now a initiative focused expressly on opioid mortality, as if folk were not dying from heroin overdose before. So again, I will get off my soapbox, Dr. Delaney, but it just strikes me. And look, it is a good thing that we do have the ability to intervene in real time with folks who are overdosing and save lives. Don't get me wrong. However, it is just striking to me that phenomenon exists.
Okay, let me ask the question of all of the 3 other people on our panel in terms of how does nursing, the dental field, and the medical field address this disparity of African American men dying from drug overdoses? Dr. Carlisle, go ahead.
Well, thank you. And as Dr. Wright said, this is not a new phenomenon. The numbers are very high presently, of course. The rate of growth, incidence rate of opioid death is super high and devastating. And I think this really speaks to a need for a focus on this as a healthcare problem that particularly impacts our community and is a challenge for our community, recognizing that it has an interface or a relationship with homelessness and other issues. We need to look at it as a public health issue. And one of the things that's happened in California has been the decriminalization of much of the use of many drugs of abuse or recreational drugs. This is important because it basically allows us to focus on the medical aspects of substance abuse. My university has had for many years a focus on substance abuse because it's such a impactful issue in the South Los Angeles community and other communities of color around our campus. And I'm happy to say that we're able to look at this as a public health issue and a medical issue, because if there's anything that is driving down life expectancy, if there's anything that is leading to premature death, if there's anything that is costing disproportionate lives lost for the African American community, it's not a criminal issue. It's not a law enforcement issue. It is a healthcare issue. And that's why I'm glad that we are here together as physicians, nurses, public health people, dentists, to talk about this issue, because it's something that remains and deserves all of our attention and focus.
Dr. Dawson.
Okay, I'm not so sure I can be as politically correct and as polite as my two physician colleagues, because I just like to go there. We have destroyed so many African-American lives because they might have had one joint or something in their car or pocket. And it didn't become a crisis until it started hitting the white population. Then everybody's son started having, athletic injuries, and they started on prescription medication. Then they got hooked on prescription medication, such light excuses that our people were not afforded that. They were treated as criminals. They was incarcerated and separated from their families. So now it is perceived not to be a legal problem as much, but a medical problem. I do agree with that, but I have to just say that we're so many years late, and we have destroyed so many Black families and so many Black families' lives. So what have nurses been doing about this? We've been talking about this for years, that this was something that should be considered to be in the medical space. And we have been able to, again, align ourselves with some of our physicians and go around the country. And actually, we were teaching and educating on opioid and other substance misuse. We don't say substance abuse. We say the word substance misuse. But then when it became I would say that it provided us with an additional platform to begin to address and talk about exactly what Dr. Wright was saying. Now we can get that medication to our population sooner so they don't overdose. Now we can talk about this without it being a stigma, and feeling like it's going to be a black mark against your entire family or your children or your wife. It's an open space where we can have the type of dialogue that we need to have and get the individuals the type of help that they need to get. And so again, we try to work alongside physicians, we try to work alongside with pharmacists, and again, moving into our faith-based organizations as well. So they will know, no, this is not just a society issue that is out there in the street or there with the homeless. It can be also within their places of worship. And so we need to combine forces in terms of addressing this. And again, let's not stigmatize people, but give them the help that they need. And also some of that help may be financial, it may be job retraining, and it could be medical issues. And again, we have to remove the negativism that we have around mental health, because some people with mental health problems are drawn into drug use as well.
Dr. Lee Butler. Dr. Lee Butler, you are muted. Okay. All right.
And Dr. Delaney, if I might, while Dr. Lee Butler is coming up, to reemphasize what Dr. Dawson has said, I would like the participants to go back to their communities. I'm very curious about the use of Narcan in our communities, because Dr. Dawson, you will remember when we couldn't get a hold of Narcan outside the ICU, and for use now it is available widely to counteract overdose. But I wonder about the equitable distribution of Narcan availability as a public health tool to save lives in the immediate term. And that is certainly something that is worth exploring in all of our communities for all the participants to perhaps explore when they go back to their respective communities.
Yeah. Dr. Lee Butler, are you back?
Yes, I for some reason couldn't unmute. So I wanted to just concur with all of the panelists. And I'll tell you, as far as Narcan, we do have access to it within the dental community, but we don't have an abundance of it. So if there were more than one or two that presented themselves in my dental office, we would just be SOL. And so, but I wanted to say that what has helped us is being a part of the interprofessional family. So now we can collaborate with one another because we now have access to who's prescribing what. And so the National Dental Association has made a conscious effort to decrease the amount of prescriptions that we write. And we're finding that we get adequate analgesic effects with just the NSAIDs. And so that's what we are focusing on, because it really was a serious, and still is, a topic of discussion. So we're just really happy to be able to be a part of that family so that we can reduce these effects.
Dr. Carlisle, you know, there's a historic distrust among African Americans of the medical profession and the health professions in general. Of course, there's a lot of reasons for that. The Tuskegee studies, the Marion Sims experiments, the radiation studies, just a whole host of things, a whole host of reasons for African Americans to distrust the medical.
Dr. Delaney, you muted or froze, but I'll just go ahead and pick up the thread here and say that this, of course, characterizes our healthcare environment today, and we have just another reminder through the COVID-19 pandemic of the impact of distrust in the healthcare system. When I speak to groups about COVID-19 testing, when I speak to groups about COVID-19 vaccination, this is one of the issues that is cited when people talk about, especially not receiving or reasons why they don't want to receive vaccinations. So this is a current, contemporary, live issue in the African American community. And this is why it's so important. And we were so successful at CVU in terms of doing over 80,000 tests in our community last year during the summer. This is why it's so important that when people in our community look at the healthcare system, they see faces like ours. I have a colleague at an institution where I'm a member of the faculty, who one day, and I was his patient, one day he stopped me. We were on a first name basis, and he said, "Dave, do you ever wondered why I picked you to be my primary care doctor?" And I said, "Well, of course, I'm a research faculty member. I'm supposed to be getting grants and cranking out papers and spending only a minimal amount of time in the clinic. I probably won't see you if you come into the emergency room or in urgent care. Yes, I wonder." And he said, "Well, the reason is that if I am unconscious in the ICU and somebody needs to make a life and death decision about me, I want you to be my doctor because I know that you understand my values and you appreciate my humanity. And I can't say that about all of your colleagues, basically." So that's just an affirmation of why this is such an issue even today. When people want to talk about COVID-19 vaccination, when they hear the advocacy for vaccination from an African-American healthcare provider, physicians, nurses, dentists, et cetera, that is often a determining decision-making characteristic for our population. So this is why it's so important that we need diversity. This is why it's so important that we need our Black Dental Association. This is why it's so important that we need people of color on the front lines of healthcare to overcome this issue of distrust in the healthcare system. And yes, it's a deserved distrust based on years and the legacy of discrimination and prejudice in the healthcare system. And we must never stop working against it. Thank you.
And Dr. Delaney, if I could just plus into what Dr. Carlisle has described, it is equally important to demonstrate that we are dismantling the roots of that distrust and dismantling it in substantive ways that will provide an equitable playing field for our patients. So let me just give you an example that systems across the country and associations across the country are getting on board with. For generations, for decades, we have calculated the staging of chronic kidney disease based on a flawed analysis of a factor called estimated glomerular filtration rate, EGFR. That EGFR was calculated on the false premise that Black people have more skeletal muscle mass and as a result have a higher creatinine. So that's all of the technical aspects of it, not evidence-based, no science behind it, yet that calculus has lived as a part of how we stage chronic kidney disease such that Black patients were presenting later and at more serious stages of chronic kidney disease than white patients. And it is just now that we are beginning to apply that calculation without the race factor, with taking out the fact that the patient is African American as part of the calculation. And what the evidence is demonstrating is not only does this obviously reduce the disparity, but it also is able to bring patients, Black patients, to care, specialty care, and also potentially kidney transplant at a much earlier stage and at a much earlier stage of overall health. So this is a concrete example of where we must continue to not only acknowledge the structural disparity of something like that EGFR calculation, but dismantle it and replace it. And in replacing it, it is our obligation to then ensure that equitable access to care is available. So the jury is still out, but we've got to start with examples like kidney disease, and there are throughout the field of medicine many other examples like that. And it is only through that mechanism that we can attempt to restore trust that equitable care is possible.
Yeah, and Dr. Delaney, may I just add one comment?
Okay. All right, Dr. Elise. Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when you mentioned those subjects, that all comes under the category of deception. And so the way that we get back and gain the trust back of our patients is truth. And we know truth has the inherent power to produce promised effects. And so morals and ethics and equity, love and hope and understanding is all encompassed in that. And so Dr. Carlisle talked about that patient. I know he knew that you had morals and ethics, and you do and make the right thing and make the proper decision where others wouldn't. And I think once we gain the trust back of our patients, then they would come to understand what it is that we're trying to teach them and to get across to them. I just wanted to make that point.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. We are now going to take questions from our audience. And anyone that has questions for the panel, will you put them in the question and answer part of this Zoom? Well, okay, not seeing it yet.
So Dr. Delaney, while the questions are coming up to you through the Zoom platform, as a pediatrician, we focus on the longitudinal impacts of what we've been talking about today. And one of the things that has me gravely concerned is the impact of intergenerational transmission of the effects of racism. And what do I mean by that? There's a whole science called epigenetics, which when Dr. Carlisle, I'll speak for the two of us, were coming through, what was not a thing. And what we're learning is that the impacts of the social determinants, and even vicariously back to the impacts of the transgressions on earlier generations, can be biologically transmitted to future generations. And DNA methylation and such is a mechanism by which this can occur. And this is particularly daunting because it speaks to a biologic embedding of the impacts of racism on future generations, and begs all the more reason for us to begin to address the social determinants in a way that really tamps down the impact on women of childbearing age, their offspring, and puts an end to the cycle, which is not just a social cycle, but it appears that there is also a biologic component to the cycle of intergenerational transmission of historically transmitted racism. And that's a science that I am learning. I am but getting my head around. But I just thought I would mention it because this is where we also have to focus attention and make sure that we have scientists and folks who have their eye on the ball relative to that phenomenon as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wright. So got 3 questions in the Q&A. Is traditional Western medicine ideal for Black healthcare? How is modern healthcare making way for alternative care approaches, such as naturopathy? All right. Did that make sense to you? Yes. Let me read it again. Is traditional Western medicine ideal for Black healthcare? How is modern healthcare making way for alternative care approaches such as naturopathy? No? Okay. All right. This one is aimed at you, Dr. Wright. Dr. Wright mentioned about opioid intervention. Are there any civil or criminal penalties for not lending us to someone who has overdosed? Also, what support can you lend without opioid training?
Yeah, so again, I don't purport to be an attorney here, but the protection for administering, I assume the questioner is asking about administering Narcan, is under a Good Samaritan law. If you're attempting to help someone, that you are not liable for administering that help. However, the flip side of that question, of course, is if you do not, if there is the ability or the access to a reversal agent like Narcan, administer that. I do not know the answer to that question, but what I would encourage again is for folks to understand locally what is available. I mean, Narcan is now available at your local pharmacy. So and again, to the point that Dr. Lee Butler made, you know, this can save someone's life. You know, this is not a trivial intervention. So I would encourage folks to understand what the access and capability is locally to Narcan. And as I understand it, you are protected under a Good Samaritan principle in helping someone in that circumstance.
Okay, here's another question. What is the most pressing issue confronting African Americans regarding health and wellness?
Well, I would like to say that one, I think it's one of the main things is dietary and nutrition. And it's poor access to quality foods. Dr. Dawson mentioned it earlier in one of her statements. And, you know, even when we go to the grocery stores, quality foods are too expensive and they can't afford that. And so they eat what they think is good because the labeling has something to do with it. It says it's nutritious. It says it's good food for you. And it has all of the things that you need. And when you really look at the ingredients, there are absolutely no nutritious value in these foods at all. And so I think that's part of the problem. And then when you go to the stores, there could be, I've seen studies where there's 77,000 items in a grocery store, but you have one shelf in one aisle that says it's health food. So I don't, what does that make to our nutritional system? And then the last thing I'd like to mention is that we need to teach and train children and adults on what's proper and, you know, the effects of GMOs even. You know, how do you identify them? And will they know that? If they won't, if we don't teach them about these things. And so I think that's part of our problem with the health of our communities members.
Question. What has probably been the most beneficial Black health innovation over the years?
Well, I think there's been quite a few, so we can't just say just one. I mean, we mentioned some here today, in terms of African Americans who did discovery around blood. We have those who have, when you was doing your opening section, you mentioned about our ophthalmologists in terms of what they developed. When you look at some drugs and a lot of the other things that have been invented, African Americans have been involved in those things as well. But many times, just like with other things, sometimes we may be out on the front line doing a lot of the work, but we may not necessarily get the recognition or the publication around some of those interventions that African Americans have truly participated in. So we have to just remember that we have not been afforded the same, I think, high level of recognition that we should have. I know that's to be true within the nursing profession, is that many times when African Americans may have stepped up and accomplished things, and the next thing you know, it may be their colleagues who are getting, credit for that work. And I'm sure that within the other health science spaces, the same may be true as well. So I wouldn't just try to come up with just one thing, but do know that we have brilliant African Americans in every space of science, and especially in terms of healthcare.
All right, this will be the last questions. How can we each become better informed advocates for ourselves, our families, and our communities in improving healthcare? Okay.
Well, I'll start off with that. I think every family needs at least one nurse who can come to those family reunions, sit around the table and talk to you about your health, and let you know that, hey, maybe what you're putting in your mouth right now, you don't really need that. But I think we just have to get more African Americans into this healthcare space. Seriously, 7 out of every 10 jobs in America touches healthcare in one form or another. Healthcare is the largest business in the United States. We don't like to say it, but it's true. Just think back. We've had our Black Fridays and we've had the market to crash and all of those things. Nothing brought America and the entire world to their knees economically other than COVID-19. Why is that? It's because it's a healthcare issue. And why did we fail at that? Is because it is a public health issue. And our medical model is built around illness care and intervention, not health promotion, not prevention of illnesses. And we don't do a very good job at recovery either. So we have to begin to revisit what we call healthcare in America and separate healthcare from illness care. Healthcare is what you find in that public domain. And again, that's why it's so important. And I tell everyone that I can speak with in my community or anyone who will listen to me, COVID-19 is not a health issue. It's a public health problem that becomes a health issue once you contact it. That's why we say put your energy into wearing your mask, washing your hands, social distancing, and staying away from crowds. Because if you can prevent yourself from catching it, you have 100% chance you're not going to end up in the hospital. Let me put it that way. So try not to catch it because that's the safest thing you can do. It becomes an acute care problem where you end up in the ER, a physician office, or in the hospital because we failed on that front end of prevention.
Well, Dr. Laney, I'm just sorry that this panel discussion is almost over. And I know we're going to have to take each of these topics separately because there's so much information that we could share with our communities. We didn't really talk about diversity and inclusion because 3.5% of the dentists in America are African American, but each university claims to have a diversity and inclusion department, but we're not graduating dental students of color, as with all of these professions. And the ones that are accepted, all of them don't graduate because they're in a toxic environment. So that's another area that we need to discuss in advocating for our communities and preparing these children to be able to apply and qualify to be accepted. But we also know there's a different system in which they interview. And so we have a lot of things that we need to discuss. So that question has a lot of areas that need to be discussed individually. And I hope and pray that we'll be able to continue our discussions on this and to be able to reach others, to be able to be informed with this type of information. And I'm sorry that more people weren't involved today, but I thank you all for allowing us to at least get started on this.
If I may, Dr. Delaney, I just want to say amen to all of that from our colleagues on the panel. I totally agree. And I would just say, when we think about the big picture, the bottom line really is health. That's where we want to go. And healthcare can be a catalyst for health, but it's not the only health catalyst. When you think about life expectancy changes, of course, in the 20th century, traditional healthcare probably generated only 20% or so of years of life gained. So there's a lot more on the table, and I agree. Public health is where a lot of that focus should be, not interventional healthcare, but preventive care. And that can include alternative healthcare strategies as well, naturopathic medicine, et cetera. But I just want to give a shout out, because I think that when I think about healthcare and access to healthcare, one of the biggest things that's impacted the African American community in the last several decades is the Affordable Care Act, and what is otherwise known as Obamacare. Drove down the rates of uninsuredness in the African American community significantly, primarily through Medicaid expansion. We're no longer in an era, at least in California, when single Black men are not eligible for Medicaid. 1/3 of the California population is now covered in Medicaid. The uninsuredness rate in California is 7%. It used to be 20-something%. This is a game changer, and we'll continue to enjoy the dividends from this going forward. And I'm looking forward to when we can talk about 0% instead of 7%.
And I have to stop you there. Gotten the message that we need to end our discussion. Again, I want to thank all of you for being on the panel and providing us all of this wonderful information, wonderful and informative messages about healthcare. So thank you so much. And I'm going to call on Dr. Valerie May Holmes to take over.
Thank you, Dr. Delaney. And thank you all for this exciting and provocative conversation. And clearly from this discussion, African Americans have contributed so much, as you started out with this panel, to the health and well-being and healthcare space. And we have so much more to accomplish. Thank you all for lifting up the importance of social determinants of health. And as Dr. Dawson so aptly said, to ensure that we need to focus more on promoting health care and wellness and not on illness care. And the bottom line is health. We must continue to acknowledge structural disparities, but also to dismantle and replace it and ensure equitable access to care is available. Dr. Lee Butler said something really profound, and I hope we take away with this. She said, truth has the power to produce positive effects, and that our morals and our ethics play such an important role in trust and in the way that we care for our patients and in the way that they trust the healthcare system. So I hope that's a major takeaway for all of us. And I thank you all once again on behalf of ASALH. We could not have conversations like this or do the work of the association without the support of our sponsors. So it's my pleasure now to recognize our legacy sponsors for this year's Black History Month Festival. These are the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, AARP, TD Bank, the Omega Life Membership Foundation Incorporated. Our media sponsors are the Afro, the Washington Informer, and the Black EOE Journal. We also wish to thank sponsors at the following sponsorship levels: our heritage sponsors, history makers, preservation, hero, and champion. Following our sponsor acknowledgements on the upcoming recorded video, we will have a rendition of Fix Me Jesus performed by Miss Samara Bowden to end our celebration today. She is a finalist in the 2021 Black Music Festival. As we bring today's festival event to a close, please let me say what a pleasure it has been for me to serve as your virtual MC for this afternoon. It has indeed been an honor, and I wish you all continued success as we press on to achieve Dr. Carter G. Woodson's vision. Thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you at the next festival event. And now our video from our sponsors.
What would you call a joy that knows no bounds? That is as solemn as it is sweet, with an outpouring of soul that connects us. Joy in resilience, joy in creativity, joy in happiness, joy in strength. What would you call a joy that knows no bounds? A joy supreme. AARP celebrates Black joy. Visit us at aarp.org/Black community.
Hello, my name is Frances Murphy Draper, and I am the CEO and publisher of the Afro-American newspapers. In August of this year, we will celebrate 130 years of our founding. We are the oldest Black business in Maryland, the third oldest in the United States. However, I've come today to salute you, Asala, on your innovative virtual programming this month, celebrating the 2022 Black History theme, Black Health and Wellness. I've also come to pay tribute to your friend and ours, your team member and ours, Mr. Edgar Brookins, also known as Mr. DC. He loved celebrating with Asala during February, and he loved Asala all year long. And so we salute him today and thank you for honoring him as well.
And now, a performance from soloist Samara Bowden entitled Fix Me Jesus. Thank you for joining us for today's very special presentation, A Presidential Conversation, Black Health and Wellness in the Eye of the Storm. Please be sure to mark your calendars for our upcoming events. On February 23rd, from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern, ASALA presents a special program, What You Don't Know About the Legacies of Slavery, Health, and Wellness, presented by the National Park Service Network to Freedom. Live, this conversation will review social practices, beliefs, and psychological dispositions that are distinct continuities from slavery. On February 27th, from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Eastern, ASALA presents Part 2 of its marquee event, Black Bodies, From Exploitation to Excellence, African American Contributions to Medical Discovery and Public Health, where we will hear a live discussion among former NFL players and medical personnel on contemporary issues addressing health and wellness among Black athletes, as well as the issues of race norming, mental health, and other relevant topics addressing this same issue. The festival will again feature music from the vast landscape of Black music performed by selected historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, including performances of Lift Every Voice and Sing. And finally, we will conclude this year's Black History Month virtual celebration with our closing program on February 28th from 6:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern. This year's theme, Black Health and Wellness, is vitally important to the Black community, especially in light of the current global pandemic. We want to encourage you all to participate and support ASALA's programs and commit to spreading the word. For more information, you can go to our website, www.asalh.org, and be sure to follow us on our social media platforms, Facebook, and our Twitter feeds. We look forward to having you join us for our 2022 virtual Black History Month Festival. So please, be sure to register today and be a part of history in the making by showing your support for ASALA, the founders of Black History Month.